One of the four main somatics: speed, strength, suppleness or flexibility, and stamina or endurance. And today we're going to have a really good look at endurance. Some somatics are more generally available, whilst other somatics are extremely specific.
Correct, yeah. So on a continuum, this is work from Ian King that he's come up with. Basically, flexibility and strength lie more on the general end of the continuum. So if you have a line going left to right on the page, on the left side of the page would be strength and flexibility as a general rule, and they're more general, which means they transfer. So if you have a good general level of strength, good general level of flexibility, they're going to transfer to all sports and all activities very well. Speed, however, is more specific. A good example of that is, running the 100 meters. You could be really good at running the 100 meters, but that doesn't necessarily mean your jab in boxing is going to be very good. It's going to be exactly the same. It's going to transfer in the same way. So there's more technical requirement and more specificity required in the training of the quality. Endurance is even more to the right. Endurance requires the most specific adaptations when you train it. And one of the greatest examples that's often used is Lance Armstrong. We all know who he is. He won 7 Tour de France's, right? His endurance is incredible. Anyone that even completes the Tour de France, their endurance is incredible, right? But he went and ran the New York Marathon, I believe it was, one year, and finished in the hundreds of places. And you think, hang on, cycling, running, they're really similar. But at the highest level, they're basically nothing alike. And Lance's central adaptations, endurance adaptations that I'll explain in a second, are incredible. They're second to none. But his peripheral adaptations were nowhere near what high-level marathon runners have.
Okay, so can we break down a little bit the difference between central and peripheral adaptation?
Yep. So central adaptation is very simple. It's the heart and lungs. So it doesn't
general cardiovascular endurance.
Yes, and ultimately, if you were to pull the body apart, you pull out the heart, you pull out the lungs, and that's the central adaptations that happen. So it doesn't matter if you're cycling, if you're rowing, if you're swimming, if you're running, if you're playing basketball, if you're doing Kyokushin karate. It doesn't matter. That sport or that activity will improve your heart's ability to contract and your blood volume and so on, and your oxygen carrying capacity and so on. Therefore, your central adaptations will improve.
And that's the most important adaptation for long-term health and
well-being,
longevity, well-being.
Yeah. And the peripheral adaptations are the movements or the mechanics that are specific to your sport. I've already used cycling as an example, and running. Now, people might look at them and say, oh, they're both lower body. They're both like kind of your legs go in a circular
rhythmic motion,
type motion. So they're not that different. They're incredibly different. One's weight bearing, one's not. One's got some eccentric activity, one doesn't. I mean, these are enormous differences at the highest level. And the other example, a good example is, let's say we get a marathon runner or the winner of the Hawaiian Ironman triathlon, right? Their central adaptations for VO2 max, their body's ability to transport oxygen would be the highest levels possible, right, in human life. But if you were to get them in a Kyokushin class and they've got to do 500 Jordan Moshigaris or 100 Jordan Moshigaris, they're not going to be able to do it. And it's not because they're not fit enough. Their central adaptations are there, but their body's peripheral adaptation at the muscle, the nervous system to get the hip flexors to contract in a certain way, to balance on one foot continuously, simply doesn't exist. So they've got the central ability to do it, but they haven't developed the peripheral ability to execute that movement. Therefore, they don't have the endurance for that. And this is the difference. This is where people get a little bit mixed up sometimes.
This is also an interesting aspect of people's delusion in martial arts, is that you can be a fifth dan in a martial art, let's say Kyokushin, or a sixth dan in Kyokushin, or a seventh. And simply because you think you've trained in the martial arts for 30, 40, 50 years, you're going to be able to out-stamina a white belt in BJJ. And I can tell you now that your seventh dan or sixth dan, fifth dan is going to be no more than a white belt in BJJ, not only technically, but also in terms of cardiovascular peripheral endurance. So you need to remember that. I think it's very, very important that we understand the specificity importance of endurance training. There's aspects of endurance too. For example, there's certain activities don't even draw on oxygen or oxidative system.
That's right.
They're anaerobic, totally.
Absolutely. They're alactic, even more than that. So there's events like the 60-meter indoor sprint, the 100-meter sprint, Olympic lifting, as an example, shot put, a lot of field events in track and field are what's called alactic in nature. They don't basically draw on the aerobic system, and they barely even draw on the anaerobic, like lactate glycolysis system either. They're basically alactate, which means they use the creatine phosphate stores that are already stored in the muscles. They're just exploiting that because the activity is under sort of 8 to 10 seconds, which is where those types of sports reside. Even within this, Shian, and that's a great lead in, Ian, and this is not the only way to break down endurance, but it's one of my favorites, and it's a great way that Ian King's come up with. He breaks it down very simply. You've got alactic power and alactic capacity. You've got lactic power and lactic capacity, and you've got aerobic power and aerobic capacity. And they're all continuums. And your sport or activity will be somewhere along that continuum, and that gives you great guidance on what energy systems to train dominantly for your sport.
And some sports are very, very specific. For example, like Mitch said, the 100-meter sprint or the Olympic lifting. But some activities like Kyokushin tournaments require all of them. Okay, this is what makes endurance preparation for a tournament so challenging. You not only have to have incredible explosiveness when you need it, but you also need the long-term endurance. If you go for a 3-minute round, then a 2-minute extension, then a 2-minute extension, you're talking now absolutely a different energy system. Our general day-to-day training builds an incredible general foundation.
Yep.
And in fact, if you do nothing but that and you do go into a tournament, you're pretty well prepared.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it, especially if you're doing kumite regularly and so on. But if you talk about a high level of competition, well, then you need to feed into the more specific preparation. How do boxers, weightlifters, and wrestlers, for example, rank, in your opinion, in terms of their physical peak, endurance, and pain threshold tolerance? 10 3-minute rounds or 12 3-minute rounds of a very specific endurance. When I used to train Tyrone Cyclone Tongia, he trained as hard as any karate fighter that I ever trained. And it was kind of easier because it's more specific, just working the hands and endurance like that. The wrestlers too, their endurance is what breaks a wrestler. If you don't have incredibly peak endurance as a world-class wrestler, you have zero chance of completing the match, because it is non-stop, just action, and everything you're doing is explosive and strong and hard. So I think wrestlers rank amongst the most rounded, fit,
I think so too,
fighters in the world. When you're talking about Olympic lifters, again, it's a very specific thing, and I think Olympic lifting and that incredible alactic explosiveness,
that's insane.
I mean, you do the measurements to them, and they're second to none as well.
But it's exactly what we talked about earlier. You put a boxer in with a wrestler under wrestling rules, I don't care who the boxer is, doesn't matter who, they are going to get smashed. Vice versa. You put a wrestler in boxing rules, they're going to get smashed. So the rule set and the specific physiological requirements determine where they go. I personally think they're all like you said, the peak elite guys, they're all the most elite of the elite at what they do, and that's why they are.
And in terms of pain threshold, well, the thing about boxing, they have a very high pain threshold. Again, it's very specific.
Yeah.
I think wrestlers too have a very high. What does a pain threshold mean? A pain, what sort of pain? I mean, you have the Prefontaine Classic, named after Steve Prefontaine. They did all these endurance tests on him, and in every respect, his endurance levels were probably no better than a high school athlete. But his mental endurance and his ability to run through pain barriers was second to none. The ability to keep going under pressure when your body wants to quit. And even Dan Gable, the great Dan Gable, talks about that. He says it's one thing for the body to quit, but when the mind quits, it's all over, Red Rover. I wanted to ask both of you, with knowledge of biomechanics, the human body improving, changing every year, how does it hold up to the ancient formative part of the art of body development in karate? Very interesting question. Because I think most of the traditional training methods were very, very intuitive. They didn't have the same testing, scientific testing that we have. If a lot of this training that they did was faced with a barrage of modern testing, these methods and that they use have proven to be very, very successful over time. But I'm also thinking of Sosai and his training in the mountains before science was even talking about it. For example, his jumping over flax seeds and constantly improving. And his plyometric jumps. He was using plyometrics and so on. So I'm sure a scientist could go in, Ryan, and look at it and go, yeah, well, we've got better ways to do that. Yeah, sure, you got better ways to do it, but we stand on the shoulders of the giants who went before us, and a lot of the scientific training that we have today is built on foundations that go back not only decades but generations and generations. A lot of training techniques stands the test of time because you look around the physical culture, the training industry today, and you have trends coming and going every 6 months. You see guys pushing sleds in the park or Roman rings in the park. They were the big thing for it. All this stuff comes and goes. But what lasts over generations and generations and generations has proved itself to be useful.
I think today there's a market for the vanity kind of virtue signaling market of how fit and strong and big someone is. That's kind of a status symbol today, particularly in the Western world. But a lot of the martial artists and a lot of martial arts training, the physicality we develop is as a byproduct. You would know this better than me probably, is a byproduct of the technical skills we develop as martial artists. So the physical component is a secondary component to the actual ability to fight, to do the techniques on a non-compliant opponent. And I say this as a physical preparation coach or strength and conditioning coach. The physicality, I think, should always be secondary to the technique, to the skills, because there's so many people who are older and you would think, they can't do a chin up, they can't do a bench press, they can't squat their body weight anymore. But you roll with them, or if they hit you, my God, it's just a completely different world. They can't do those more modern things that well. And this is the central and the specific adaptations or the peripheral adaptations that happen in training over time. Just because something can't be measured doesn't mean that it's not happening as well. And we get to feel it, as I think as Benny the Jet said, seeing is not believing, feeling is, when we get to train with certain kinds of people as well. So I think that's an important perspective on that.
There are different ways to train your endurance.
Absolutely,
as well, right?
Yeah, of course there are.
The repetitive training that we do in basics training is a very important form of muscular endurance and endurance itself. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you always say, Xiao, by the time the count happens, you should be finished your technique. And that in itself is an enormous difference, because you can go, ich, ni, san. I did 1,000 punches, right? But if you go, ich, ni, san, and it's super quick, you're developing a different adaptation entirely.
Yeah,
So just little things like that is where the specific adaptations of great endurance happen.
So anyone can do 1,000 punches, but when you do them so that the movement is like an ECG, like that, that's a very different adaptation. Equipped powerlifters can't walk upstairs without getting back pumps and
short of breath. Yeah, that's so true. So powerlifting is probably one of the most unathletic sports, if I can be so kind, to put it that way. And it's so true. A lot of powerlifters take their own chair to the gym because they sit down and rest so long between sets. So you're exactly right about the endurance component of powerlifting is lacking, and that's for a reason. It's because they're such an alactic sport. So they're getting that specific adaptation. But that's true.
And if you had to pick between powerlifting, nice segue, powerlifting, bodybuilding, Olympic weightlifting, which would carry over most for karate? Well, I don't think there's even an argument there.
No.
It's not even close.
Olympic weightlifting.
Yeah, Olympic weightlifting by a long way. Bodybuilding, you have a peripheral benefit simply because you are moving weight, so you're getting stronger. Powerlifting the same. But in terms of specificity for karate tournaments, I don't think anything in the weightlifting world comes close to Olympic weightlifting and the explosiveness of that. And so I know Mitch, whenever he's asked to work with Kyokushin fighters, even BJJ fighters, and they want to work with him, the first thing he does is he works with them on Olympic lifting.
Yeah, deadlifting, pulling from the floor. All the variations of the Olympic lifts are key.
You only do high rep calisthenics at our dojo, which means you're going to be very fit in terms of doing high rep stuff.
So outside the dojo, you don't want to replicate that. You want to move towards perhaps Olympic lifting or the lower rep, higher intensity variations. So you build that adaptation in your body over time.
If you're looking for a way to supplement the high rep calisthenics at your dojo, definitely find an Olympic weightlifting coach and work on that. David, the Margaret Street Dojo Friday night circuits covered everything. That's the dojo that Tekken. Does anyone know Tekken?
The game Tekken.
Yeah, there's like an online game Tekken, in Japanese Tekken. And the Margaret Street, you go to, who was it? Was it Via at the dojo? Someone,
I think it might have been. Yeah,
pointed out that at the Tekken wiki, in that they talk about a fighter named Jin Kazama, and they talk about him having trained at the Margaret Street Dojo in Brisbane. It's just very cool. But anyway,
with you specifically, they mentioned Cameron Quinn too, don't they?
I don't think it says he trained with me, but it does say that it was my dojo.
Okay.
Yeah, that was interesting. Xiang Kan, have you noticed that you have changed the way in which you perform certain kata movements since becoming more proficient in wet wrestling? A good question. There's two things that make the change happen. One is age, and you lose mobility in the knees and hips. So definitely certain movements aren't as dynamic, and they're tighter and shorter, and I don't stretch out the stances anywhere near as much. But also, yes, there are certain interpretations. The kata might go from here down into this position. And in my head now, instead of going boom, 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 without any clarity of what I'm doing, now in my head, I literally am getting my body weight moving in a way so that I can dig that single leg up and use my head to take them down. And I think that's what gives individual expression to kata. In Japanese, Junin Tohiro, 10 people, 10 colors. And I think when someone's been training for 50 years, if the way they interpret the kata is not slightly different, adapting to their body and their mindset and their personal experiences and training, well, I think they're kind of missing out on something, because that's where the growth comes, is the input. Look at BJJ and the incredible explosive growth of BJJ techniques. And a lot of it has to do with different individuals who are applying technique in a way that most suits them. And karate is no different. Tradition came before science. Well, yeah, there were traditions around before science. Let me also say, truth is one. In the Vedas, it says, truth is one, though the wise know it has many names. Many scientific principles were rooted in traditions because those traditions obeyed natural law, and science is just a form of natural law. So very, very often there is no conflict between tradition and science. Did you want to add anything?
Before we go to more questions, sure.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll share, because there's some great questions coming in, which we appreciate, is if you're to develop endurance, there's probably two broad suggestions that I have for people. The first one is you want to develop endurance at a certain intensity. So you want to be doing the thing that you need to be doing, whether it's Kyokushin, if you're preparing for a grading, or if you're preparing for a tournament, or for just life, whatever it happens to be, at a certain intensity. And that's number one, because if you train at a really low intensity, but then all of a sudden your requirement is much higher, you're going to blow out. You haven't prepared your body for it. And the second thing is that you want to develop your endurance with a certain technical model or a technical quality. And I think wrestling is such a good example to use for this, because you can be the fittest up the stairs, fastest up the hill, strongest in the gym and all that kind of thing. But then you get someone with a wrestler and they just know how to get an underhook, how to get an arm drag, how to transfer from a single to a double to a high crutch or whatever it is. It doesn't matter how fit you are or what your physicality is, you're not going to be able to do well. One of the greatest ways to develop endurance is through fantastic technique and being technically excellent at what you're doing. And that develops pretty much the exact or very close to the endurance requirements that you require in your sport. So technically drilling really well at progressively higher intensities for a long period of time while remaining injury-free in itself is a wonderful endurance activity that I think gets understated. It doesn't get enough focus.
Why would you recommend BJJ over judo when it comes to preparing for a showdown at your gym? What makes BJJ special? I think at the end of the day, there are more similarities between BJJ and judo than differences. The only real major difference is the rule set. Judo, with the Olympics and judo, you want to win a gold medal in judo, you're going to spend an awful lot of time getting that grip and getting that throw. In BJJ, you can get that grip and get that throw. You might only get 2 points, but if you don't know what to do it, because in judo, you get a nice throw, that's the end of the game. You win a gold medal. In BJJ, the same throw just is the entryway into a series of techniques. You may not even get a point for it if the opponent deals with it well. So they both have strengths. They both have relative connections to karate. In terms of karate, if we think semi-realistically at least, our entry is based on hits and kicks. Judo's entry is based on grips. So we can use our hits and kicks to enter. I think if you can do both judo and BJJ, it's only going to be beneficial. But if I would recommend BJJ over judo, it's because BJJ's rule set is on the ground and very, very specific and very, very dominant in terms of its control because of a time factor as well. In judo, when you're on the ground, generally speaking, you hold them for 25 seconds or they'll stand you up. In BJJ, you can hold them for 5 minutes. And if you don't finish them, you're not going to get the point. Also, he said that as a karate fighter, if you get taken to the ground by a wrestler or a judo player, you don't know what to do, you're in trouble. His theory was that you need to be able to take the fight back to your world, which is the stand-up world of range 1 and 2. And BJJ is extremely good at extricating themselves from very difficult positions. So, look, judo plus Kyokushin, incredible. Yeah. Kyokushin plus BJJ, unbelievable. Kyokushin plus judo plus BJJ, now you're really talking. You add wrestling. Now you're even talking even more. So there is no limit. If anything, I would add wrestling to that mix as well. Xiao Shimaryu was the one that did the motion capture for Jin Kazama. That's right, Pinan Sono Yonkata for the Tekken video game. His background is Kyokushin karate. Yeah, Shihan Shimaryu is one of the greats of Kyokushin. That's true. What is the strongest punch and how do you do it? What do you think of Diaz's strategy where they don't punch as hard in the beginning of the fight and they amp it up? Ecclesiastes 7:8. I'm not a proselytizer, but if there's one verse that a martial artist needs to remember, it's Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 8. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. And this is what Nate Diaz does, man. That notion of making sure that you finish stronger than your opponent is one of the greats. And how many great fights has he won having done that? Okay. You don't want to burn yourself out. Even boxers, kickboxers, they'll move around for a few rounds. They'll get a feel. Okay. And if they find that the opponent is lacking, well, then they'll move in quickly. The whole notion of finishing strongly is a philosophy that we had. We used to do what we call 20-second slices, and we'd take a match, whether it's 3 minutes, a round of 3 minutes, we'd slice it up into 20 seconds. And we go up and down in terms of the energy expenditure, but it was up and down like that. And we always tried to finish absolutely the strongest towards the end of the fight. And in terms of the strongest punch, I actually spoke to Solsai's nephew, who was a high-level Taekwondo exponent, but also a physics professor at university. And he pointed out that probably the most powerful punch is the overhand right, because you have centrifugal force plus gravity plus all the body with a good technique coming down. But realistically, the most powerful punch is the punch that knocks your opponent out. You don't need an elephant gun to knock out a mouse. So it's very relative. Sometimes you only need what you need. And it's not always useful to try and knock someone out with absolutely the hardest punch because there's an energy expenditure situation there as well. Do you think of in the future we will see the harmonious fusion between Kyokushin, striking, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, in some martial arts dojo to become more complete? Yeah, I think that's the direction we're heading. In my dojo, we've been using wrestling and grappling techniques that we've found have very, very strong connection to the movements of kata, keeping in mind that kata were developed by karate masters who all had a 5th and 6th dan in judo, so they understood chokes and so on. You do certain movements in kata that are very, very obscure unless you think in terms of grappling. I think the Kyokushin training system is very profound, very, very good. And so we don't want to necessarily play with that. But that only represents a portion of your training. There's also the portion you're doing outside. Keep in mind, Sosai had his teaching license in Aikido Jiu-Jitsu. He was also a fourth dan in Judo. He also trained with pretty well anyone. That cross-training is key. A good Greco-Roman wrestler is one of the toughest sons of guns on the planet. There's no doubt about it. I was very privileged to spend time and learn a lot from one of the world's great Greco-Roman wrestlers, Randy Couture, and I can tell you that that guy was not only tough, but also technically incredible. His Greco-Roman controls and so on, well, we know, we've seen him in UFC. So I think is as good as BJJ? Well, it's very different. A Greco-Roman wrestler, if he's not familiar with the BJJ rules, who ends up on the ground, could find himself in an awful lot of trouble. The flip side is there isn't a BJJ no-gi grappler in the world who can come close to the Greco-Roman upper body controls of, let's say, an Olympic-level Greco-Roman wrestler. Kyokushin plus Shui Jiao or Sambo wrestling would be an awesome combination too. They're all the same. I tend to think that you can only choke and break arms and take down in so many ways. The trick is to find the system that most suits your personality and your physicality. That's important. Olympic Judo is different to Kodokan Judo now, and Kosen Judo has much greater focus on Newaza. Yep, Kosen Judo differentiated from the mainstream Judo simply by not following the Olympic Judo rule changes. Basically still follow the Judo timing, especially the Judo rules of pre-Olympic Judo, which means they do a lot more groundwork. So it resembles a lot more BJJ. I've been doing 3 runs a week to develop more leg strength. Do you guys recommend anything else besides that consistency of training? I recommend a whole bunch of things, but I also recommend you don't stop that. I mean, that's a great way to get endurance. It just depends what your goal is. How far are you running? How quick you're running for stamina and fighting. My personal recommendation would be around 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, and you're doing fartlek, you're doing a lot of speed play, involve a lot of sprint work in that, hill work in that,
Stairs,
that sort of thing, because it's enjoyable, it breaks up the monotony, and it forces your body to adapt to different outputs at the same time. So I think it's great. Kibadachi tends to be a little stressful on the knees. Does it get better as you train it more? Yes. In one respect, everything improves with training, but in another respect, I tend to turn my knees out. So where a kata requires kibodachi, I now go to shikodachi because that aligns the knees. So there's less pressure laterally. We need to remember too, a lot of karate stances are transitional stances. We see them, we see pictures of them. We see sometimes people fighting in those stances. You don't want to be fighting in a kibodachi. One, you lose your mobility, and two, you're really open to a strong leg kick. But besides that, a lot of the times these stances like Zenkutsu, Kibadachi, and so on are actually very transitional. So the Kibadachi is a great stance when you want to come in, drop your weight, and maintain balance and sweep someone. Okay, and a lot of the techniques that you'll see that involve Kibadachi involve movements that are sweeps as well. What are your thoughts on Dutch kickboxing, historical roots, and Kyokushin? I think that's a good question.
And your book, you talk about that in your second edition of Budo Karate Masayama book.
Yep.
There you go.
Thanks to Radek, the branch chief of Poland, he created these fantastic Budo karate shirts for us. What makes the Dutch kickboxing different is one simple thing. First of all, there are 4 main gyms, but all 4 of those, the instructors had Kyokushin backgrounds. You combine that with Muay Thai and kickboxing, you have a really good combination, mainly because of the mental side of Kyokushin and the Kyokushin fighting spirit and the spirit of Us. And you add that to kickboxing and you've got a match made in heaven. There's no doubt about that. So I think that's a good question. And I think that's the primary key, is the 4 main Dutch kickboxing gyms had Kyokushin backgrounds, and they were influenced very strongly by the Kyokushin fighting spirit and the Kyokushin training attitude. What are your thoughts about the more internal martial arts as Qigong, Tai Chi, develop the body? External arts seem to come with more injury. Look, I think it's great. And especially as you get older, clearly the body needs to move more carefully, more slowly, and more centered. Qigong is just moving energy. Any martial art in the East has an aspect of Qigong in it. Even Solsai talks extensively in the Kyokushin way and also in This is Karate about the importance of hara, tanden, uniting the mind and body as one. And in Eastern traditions, there is no separation between the body and mind. And things like Qigong and Tai Chi really focus that. I think Tai Chi, very beautiful. But anyway, Ryan, yes, I think Qigong, Tai Chi, nothing beats pressure testing your technique against a non-compliant opponent whose objective is to hurt you. And anyone who's doing Qigong and Tai Chi who uses their training as a form of fighting, they need to pressure test as well. Having said that, as Itosu Anko points out, that you can train karate for fitness and health, or you can train it for fighting. You just need to be clear which one you're doing. And it's the same with Tai Chi and Qigong. What are your objectives? If you're doing it for health and longevity, there's probably very few things in the world that are as complete a system for that and for the ability to move and keep the spine flexible and so on, centering the mind and body. With regard to hill sprints, from my research, the goal is to maintain a sprint up the hill and stop when you fade out, then redo.
It depends.
It depends.
Yeah, look, if you're training your lactic system and maximal power type thing, yeah, that would be the case. But if you're training lactate tolerance and the anaerobic system, no, when you get tired, you want to keep going. So it just depends on the outcomes. Both are required in Kyokushin tournaments, but I do think that it's underdone training with maximal intensity and a lot of rest. That is underdone as a general rule in training. So I'm a fan of athletes executing that more.
And hill sprints too, I'll add that there's the mental aspect as well. When you need to develop fighting spirit and the ability to keep going under pressure when it hurts, hill sprints are a killer. But one aspect that needs to be respected is the way it develops mental endurance as well.
Yeah, hill sprints, sorry, Sean, one thing on that. Hill sprint running can develop all of the different physical endurance components. All of the energy systems can be done through different work-rest intervals. So that's a beautiful thing about running.
How do cardiovascular endurance and muscular endurance work together to improve overall physical performance?
Exactly what we talked about earlier, Mel. The cardiovascular endurance is the central adaptation that we talked about, and the muscular endurance is the peripheral adaptation, the adaptation that happens at the muscle level, the peripheral, the arms and legs.
Technically,
through doing the techniques, all the time. That's how it improves performance. Basically, in more technical sports like any of the martial arts, having one without the other will result in disaster for you. You need both.
And that's the science of training, is finding that balance. Would you recommend people do hundreds of reps of Kion per day to improve Kyokushin specific endurance? I think I remember also recommending that. Well, that's one way to do it, and that's one of the beauties of Kyokushin is that by doing that, you do get a very strong peripheral adaptation. Every day, how much time have you got? Are you training full time? Are you able to put aside 10 hours a day for training? In that case, you might have time to do a lot of this stuff. Plus, you need to remember that, as Mitch always points out, that the training outcome is a combination of training plus rest. So you need to rest as well. I think it's also age specific too. And what are your goals? It comes back to, it depends on what your goals are as well. There's time and place for that. There's no doubt about it. Some Kyokushin teachers don't know anything else other than, come on, train harder, do another 100, this sort of thing. But when it comes to extremely high level technical skill, you're not going to have it.
Yeah, that won't give you the ability to counter certain kicks and develop specific footwork or get out of Kesagatami, or, you got to drill those specific things on top as well. And all training is an opportunity cost. It's something that I think about all the time with clients is when you're doing one thing in training, you're choosing to prioritize that thing over every single other thing. So it's an opportunity cost. So the training decisions that we make, in my view, have to be very clear. You have to think about them deeply because you're not doing other things by doing that thing, if that makes sense. So you want to do it well.
That's very, very important. How many hill sprints should I do to prepare for the tournament? How long have you got? How long are the hills? How steep are they? It's very important that you get specific, but I wouldn't overdo it. I mean, if you've got a reasonably long hill that might take, let's say, a minute or two to get up, increase the intensity and decrease the volume. That's my recommendation. If you have a hill that is demanding, that takes anywhere between 1 and 3 or 4 minutes to get up, 10's plenty. If you're combining it with good, and make sure they're good high intensity hills, it's very, very dependent on
Yeah,
what
your
outcome
goals
you're
are and
after,
stuff.
yeah.
But it's under training to start with, and then build up over time would be my recommendation. So start with 1 or 2, and then
Yeah.
build it up over time.
And what you can do between the hills, you can do dynamic stretching, maikyages, shadow sparring, push-ups, sit-ups,
Jump
footwork,
squats.
jump squats, things like that, and then do the next hill sprint. And that way you make training enjoyable as well. For those who can't run the hills due to age or knees, that's not you or me, is it, Gaz? I've always found that a strong, brisk walk up a relenting hill is also good. There you go. Mystery Road.
Yeah.
Mystery Road, Tambourine Mountain, that's a killer. We used to have the road at Red Hill in Brisbane too, which was so steep you stand at the top, you couldn't see the bottom.
Yeah.
That's right. Jan Plus Gym, Tom Harring Gym, Chakariki Gym. There's a fourth one too. I think that combination of Kyokushin Muay Thai developed by Jan Plus and Tom Harring.
And Voss, was it?
Yeah, Johan
Johan
Voss
Voss.
lead the world. Where it goes from there, we don't know. I hope they have future generations to carry it forward. But there's no doubt about it. Tom Harring, Jan Plas, and Johan Voss, I think, innovative world leaders in terms of combining this fighting spirit of Kyokushin with the incredible ring skills of Muay Thai fighters. We always do sessions that are intervals of tense release or high intensity and low intensity in intervals. Yeah, I mean, if it's good for you, stick to it, and that's a good combination. You can't go high intensity all the time. The world wasn't built like that. Voss Jim Medjira, Chakariki, Golden Glory. There you go. They're the 4. Beautiful. I just wish I remembered the instructor's name at Golden Glory. Funnily enough, I don't mind sprinting uphill. The problem is always the downwards. So any damage I've done to my knees over time has been the downward gravity loaded effect on the knees. Vas boom. There you go. Appreciate that. Ronan, with hill sprints, your body tells you when it's enough. When your running technique starts to suffer, that's a good yardstick too. 2 sides to that, but definitely if your focus is on technique and if your focus is on alactic anaerobic sprinting, once you start to lose your technique, you're way past.
That's it.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, guys. Us, good to see you all, and really, really appreciate your input. And if you've got anything else to add, just add it, and we look forward to seeing you next week.